Order. I call Richard Ford to move the motion.
Thank you, Chair. And I beg to move that this House has considered the potential merits of an international special tribunal on Ukraine. And it is an honour to serve under your chairship.
Of course it is.
The title of this debate should refer to crime rather than crimes. Crime singular, because today's debate is about the crime of aggression. I think it might have been amended by the table office to read crimes plural, but I'm very much hoping that we can keep crime of aggression as the topic for this debate. It's 15 months since we last had a debate on the crime of aggression and on the potential merits of a special tribunal on Ukraine. On the 9th of May 2023, I opened a debate in this hall. That, in turn, was 15 months after the February 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's easy to forget now the shock that many of us felt 2.5 years ago on the 24th of February, when we woke up to discover that our intelligence agencies had been right all along in their forecasts, and that the Kremlin had deployed over 150,000, some think nearer 200,000 of Russia's armed forces personnel across the border into Ukraine. It is that original decision, that original aggression, on which today's debate should focus. The crime of aggression is defined as the planning, preparation, initiation or execution by a person in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state. It is called a leadership crime because under the Rome Statute, criminal responsibility is limited to a person in a position to direct the political or military action of a state. The key thing to think about with regards to the crime of aggression is it is the original sin. It is the leadership crime from which other international crimes flow, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. If you've been looking at newspapers this week, you may see that there's been press attention on Putin's visit to Mongolia and suggestions that Mongolia should heed an International Criminal Court arrest warrant to transfer Putin to The Hague. That arrest warrant relates to an alleged war crime, which in particular is the unlawful deportation of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. But this, like other war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine, would not have occurred had it not been for the original aggression. 15 months ago, when addressing the last government, I asked the Conservative minister that the special tribunal should be as international in character as possible. This is because a national tribunal based on Ukrainian law, or a regional tribunal, would not be sufficiently international in character for the personal immunities to be disapplied. These immunities are in relation to the head of state, the foreign secretary, and the president. The preference of members of the G7 has been for the creation of a Ukrainian court, based on Ukrainian law based in The Hague. But the problem with such a proposal is that if the special tribunal is part of a domestic legal system, none of the international elements of the tribunal will apply. As head of state, Putin would have immunity in a foreign domestic court. Only Russia would be able to waive that immunity. Foreign ministers and diplomats also have a similar personal immunity under the domestic courts of other countries, such as that of Ukraine. Now, we saw with the Minsk agreements that there was a willingness on the part of the Kremlin to accede to some of the demands, only to row back on those agreements subsequently. And what we cannot have in any future negotiation is some sort of bargaining or bartering away of these personal immunities in favour of a political agreement which the Kremlin can then renege on, as it did before. Immunity applies to heads of state and governments for acts performed in the exercise of their functions, even after they've left office. And as such, they should be dealt with by an international court at an intergovernmental level. 15 months ago, the then FCDO minister stated that the UK government didn't have a definitive view about whether a special tribunal should be a Ukrainian court established with international support or a fully international court. The minister said at the time that all options were on the table. The UK has traditionally held the position previously that only the UN Security Council has the power to disapply personal immunities. And clearly this will not fly, given that Russia has veto power over any resolution of the Security Council. The current Minister of State for Europe, that is the Honourable Member for Cardiff and South Penarth, was present at that debate 15 months ago. And then, speaking in the capacity as Shadow Minister, he asked the Conservative government about immunities and said that this was a critical issue that we need to address in any model of a special tribunal. In February of this year, an international conference took place just across the road from here at Church House to consider a special tribunal. The communiqué from the conference referred to the merit of a strictly international tribunal, or a highly internationalised tribunal, having key international features: an international agreement, reference to international law for the purpose of jurisdiction, significant international components such as prosecutors, judges and the venue, and firm international backing, where possible, from international and regional organisations. The communiqué said, "We believe this would offer the best hope of disapplying relevant immunities and give a tribunal full legitimacy and complement the ongoing work of the ICC in investigating alleged acts of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity committed on the territory of Ukraine." The effect of lifting immunities could relate to that most precious thing for any tyrant, their reputation. The late Paddy Ashdown visited Slobodan Milosevic several weeks before NATO military action against Belgrade in 1999. Ashdown commented that Milosevic seemed more frightened by the threat of indictment by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia than of NATO bombing. 20 years ago, at the height of liberal interventionism by what at the time we called rather grandly the international community, Lord Ashdown reflected on international justice in relation to war, and he wrote, "These new courts and tribunals which the world has established in recent years have the potential to become instruments not only for justice, but also for prevention, since they can represent a warning to belligerent or tyrannical leaders." These days, there's far less talk of a global village. Terms like international community are used far less readily, and they don't strike a chord in the way that they did 25 years ago. In February 2022, when the UN Security Council considered a resolution condemning Russia's aggression in Ukraine, both India and China abstained. The Council of Europe is seeking to fill that gap. An international tribunal based on a treaty with the Council of Europe would be sufficiently international to overcome the personal immunities if its founding treaty was open to any state and if it was ratified by at least 60 states. The involvement of the Council of Europe in the creation of a special tribunal, together with the potential accession of non-member states from outside Europe, would contribute legitimacy to the effort to prosecute the crime of aggression committed in Ukraine. Yesterday evening, I talked to someone else who participated in the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Sir Geoffrey Nice was the lead prosecutor of Slobodan Milosevic for the UN. And Sir Geoffrey wrote the following to me following our conversation. "No self-respecting lawyer, indeed, no self-respecting human should have anything to do with any court premised with an immunity granted by political agreement." I know that this is of genuine interest to the Minister today, and I look forward to any contribution from her or other honourable members in this debate about whether the UK has a stance where personal immunities should be disapplied. Surely we cannot see immunities applying for President Putin, for President Lukashenko, for Sergei Lavrov and other senior architects of the aggression in Ukraine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I remind members to bob in their place if they're intended to speak in this debate? The question is that the House has considered the potential merits of an international special tribunal on crimes of aggression in Ukraine. Sorry, Layla Moran.
your chairmanship, Mr. Efford. I want to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Honiton and Sidmouth, for securing this important debate. The fact that it is the second time in just a year that he's brought this to the House again, and I believe his first Westminster Hall in this Parliament, just shows his commitment to Ukraine, and indeed the Liberal Democrat commitment to Ukraine, which stands unwaveringly, as do the entire House. I, like members across the House, have been appalled by the violence and devastation we have witnessed on our doorstep since Putin's illegal invasion. Homes, schools and hospitals have been destroyed by Putin's bombs. Communities have been turned into war zones. And though the conflict has faded from the headlines somewhat, the war itself wages on. Just 1 week ago, Ukraine was subject to an enormous air attack, with Russia launching 127 missiles and 109 attack drones overnight and into Monday morning. At least 7 were killed and dozens were wounded. The attack appeared to be targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik, member of our sister party, HoC, has raised concerns that, and I quote, Russia keeps bringing us closer and closer to that total blackout. She says homes in Kyiv do not have electricity for the majority of the day, and people are really worried about how they will get through the winter. It's very clear that Russia's aggressive actions in Ukraine are dangerous and destabilizing. Its war is illegal, and it continues to press forward with egregious breaches of international law. So I'm pleased that my honourable friend, the member for Honiton and Sidmouth, has raised the potential for a special tribunal on the crime of aggression. Human rights and the rule of law are at the core of Liberal Democrat values. Where there are breaches of international law, it is right that those are responsible are held to account without fear or favour. Now, a crime of aggression consists of the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution by a person in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state of an act of an aggression. In the case of Russia's actions in Ukraine, there is clearly a case to answer. The Liberal Democrats wholeheartedly back our international institutions like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. Their processes and judgments should be supported. But as my right, I will of course.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady, and I want to pay particular tribute to her Honourable friend for bringing this debate. It's very important. Will she agree with me about the crucial role that the international rules-based system has to play? And will she agree with me that today of all days, on the appalling attack on Poltava that we've seen, underlines the need for this tribunal?
Moran.
I thank him very much for his intervention. There is nothing that he said that there is to disagree with. The world is a tumultuous place. It has never been more important to have a strong international rules-based order, one that feels very rickety right now. And this is another way that we can show that the international community can act in concert to bring perpetrators of injustices to account. So I thank him for his intervention. As my honourable friend said so clearly, in the cases of a crime of aggression in Ukraine, these courts are restricted. As neither Ukraine nor the Russian Federation are party to the Rome Statute, the court cannot exercise jurisdiction in the case of the crime of aggression. And given Russia's membership of the Security Council, frankly, it would veto any efforts to the Council to refer it to the court. A special crimes tribunal would allow those responsible to be held accountable for their crimes and not to escape international justice through legal loopholes. The fact that Ukraine itself supports a special tribunal should be reason enough to pursue this. President Zelensky said, if we want true justice, we should not look for excuses and should not refer to the shortcomings of the current international law, but make bold decisions that will correct the shortcomings of those norms. The Liberal Democrats were pleased to see the previous government join the core group dedicated to achieve accountability for Russia's aggression against Ukraine back in 2023. But there has been slow progress since then. Perhaps most concerningly, a lead KC suggested earlier this year that politicking within the ICC itself was halting the process. Philip Sands KC, a leading advocate of an international tribunal, said it was so sad that the institution seems most opposed to this idea is the ICC in the form of its prosecutor and some of its judges. This is not an issue of principle for them, but an issue of turf. I sincerely hope that he is wrong in that assessment and that they will not stand in the way of this, or indeed anyone else should either. So I will be interested to hear what the new minister has to say about their government's position, exactly what steps they are taking at a diplomatic level to advance the progress of a special tribunal. And Putin underestimates the brave resistance of Ukrainians, their commitment to their democracy, to their liberty, and to their country. But as Putin redoubles his efforts to attack Ukraine, so too must we redouble our efforts to stand in their defense. The spectre of a second Trump presidency has Putin rubbing his hands. We only have one option: to stand with our Ukrainian allies as they seek to bravely resist Russia's illegal invasion. This means working with international partners to establish a special tribunal to make sure Putin is held account for his crimes. As the new government looks to re-establish Britain's place in the world stage, this is a golden opportunity to show the rest of the world when we stand up for international law, we mean it.
Mr. Chairman, can I, first of all, thank you for calling me. I'm a well-known advocate for Ukraine. Proudly worn this ribbon on my jacket for the last 2 years. I don't do it, and others don't do it either, Mr. Chairman, because it's a habit to do it as a reminder for those across the world who think that things are getting better in Ukraine. The fact is, no, they're not. So I thank the honourable member for Honiton and Sidmouth for bringing this forward, and I was very happy to be a co-signature in his request to the Backbench Committee to have this debate. It's also nice to see a lot of new faces here in the chamber, and some returning as well, and they all stand united in where we are to support Ukraine in the world that we live. By wearing the ribbon, as I say, a reminder of the fact that it is not well in the world, and it isn't. And indeed, I've often referred to my honourable member for East London Dry and say, I think the world's going mad. And all honesty, Mr. Chairman, I think it has. The Bible refers to wars and rumours of wars, and I can never remember as many wars in the world as there is at this moment in time. I wear this because when I'm opening a charity shop in my local high street. It does embolden Ukrainian refugees, and we've all got them, Mr. Chairman, and are continuing to come and say they're really pleased to see you wearing the ribbon, because that's a way of encouraging the Ukrainians that live in my constituency, and indeed in everybody's constituency, to be aware that their Member of Parliament is doing his best for them. I also wear it because I want to remind others that steps need to be taken to not simply help Ukraine, but to remind the despots that there are in this world that there's a core value that emboldens the allies, and indeed all of us in this room collectively, irrespective of our political aspirations, together to stand together, and that is a cause of freedom, of liberty, of democracy, the right to make our own decisions. Yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that in standing with Ukraine, as he quite rightly indicates, we should be pressing the government to ensure that the sanctions that were put in place are more rigidly enforced, because the mistake that many made in the West wasn't just 2 years ago, but in fact 10 years ago when Crimea was invaded, and that unless Putin sees that the West is prepared to stand up to him, he will continue in his aggression and murder and butchery as before.
Yeah, my honourable friend as always speaks words of wisdom, and his words of wisdom are very appropriate for where we are. I'm not smarter than anybody else. I never professed to be, Mr. Chairman, but many of us at that time thought that we needed to stand up to Crimea. We didn't. I'm not blaming anybody for that, but it's just a fact of where we were. If we did it then, I think the attacks in Donbass would not have happened with the same level of ferocity. So we need to be very clear on where we're standing and what we're trying to do. I have a very thriving Ukrainian population in my constituency of Strangford. I know others have, by the way. I know that because the previous government's policy of letting Ukrainians in was very clear, and I welcome what the previous government done. And I'm very pleased, by the way, just to say, Mr. Chairman, to see the Minister in her place, and I look forward to the Minister's response. I'm not going to give her a big head, but just to say this, the Minister has shown a lot of confidence in the Chamber in the last few days. Many of us have been impressed by how she has responded to the questions being asked, and we look forward to her contribution. Also very pleased to see the Shadow Minister in her place. She and I have been friends ever since she's been here, and we look forward again to her contribution. Many of those people I've helped from my constituency of Strangford have been Ukrainians to do with visas, to do with their time to stay here. It's to do with jobs. It's to do with places in school. I've been very happy to have helped and assisted. We've also, in Ballynahinch High School in my constituency of Strangford, we have a school that has greatly embraced Ukrainians, and they have a class of specifically Ukrainian students coming from those who work in the businesses round about Ballynahinch and further afield. They have teachers from Ukraine, they have classroom assistants from Ukraine, they have domestic staff from Ukraine. These all are doing what they're doing in Ballynahinch. I just want to say this, I think I probably said to my honourable friend about this one, but our intention probably in the month of September, certainly in the month of October if we're spared, is to have an event, because the principal of Ballynahinch High School, Paul Marks, he wants to with his school pupils, organise an event where the chefs will make the meals, the pupils will serve the tables, but the people who will be guests will be those of Ukrainian descent who are living in Northern Ireland. I think it's a great thing to do. I know others have done it across their constituencies, but I think it's a way of encouraging those Ukrainians that they're very much in our thoughts. So I welcome this debate today. And again, thank the member for Honiton and Sidmouth for bringing it to the floor to highlight not simply the plight of the Ukrainian people, but the fact that there's an onus on us all to call this out for what it is and to take the international steps that are appropriate. The UN General Assembly of 1974, in Article 1 of the definition of what aggression is, and my goodness, we watch it every day with Russia against Ukraine. And it lists some of the acts that could amount to aggression as including. And every one of these, Mr. Chairman, when I mention them, people will say, well, that happened yesterday in Ukraine, the day before, because it did. That's what it means. Invasion, occupation, or annexation of another state's territory. Bombardment of another state's territory. Blockades of ports or coasts. Attacks by one armed force against another. Russia is guilty of all these. I do say this as well. I think it's important sometimes that when we blame Russia for it, there are many good people in Russia who do not subscribe to what has happened, but they're not often heard because of the suppression that happens in Russia. And I think sometimes it's a good thing to remind ourselves that not all Russians are bad.
On that note, would you give way? I thank him very much for saying this. Our sister party, Yablaka, I speak to on a regular basis using forms of communication that they at that time deemed safe. Over and over again, their brave protesters have ended up in jail, some have had death threats, and they describe their own horror at what Putin is doing, are keen to say that he does not speak for them, but find themselves completely silenced. So I thank him for raising that point. And would he agree with me that we should be doing more of raising their voices in this Parliament?
I do agree more, and maybe when the Minister responds, I'm hoping that perhaps maybe the Right Honourable Lady can give us some indication of what can be done to help those groups in Russia as much as you can without drawing attention to them, perhaps. I'm very conscious, it's easy for me standing here in Westminster Hall to make a comment whenever people in Russia that we're encouraging may take a stand that may be detrimental for their well-being for the future. So I'm conscious of what we do, but there may be some way that the Minister can indicate that we can. It's abundantly clear that even in the most broad terms that Russia is guilty of aggression, and the question is now to us, what do we do with that information? This debate today is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to show solidarity with Ukrainians. It's an opportunity to stand alongside the Ukrainians here at home, but also in Ukraine. Do we continue to sit on the sidelines and direct a few anti-tank missiles their way, the ones that we say we, Northern Ireland produces in Talis in Northern Ireland, and which has been to the detriment of the Russian armour, and have been effective in every way. But also what makes it effective even more is that the Ukrainians have been able to adapt those weapons in a way to take the threat and the battle straight to Russia. I had the opportunity just on Friday past with the Honourable Member for East Belfast to visit Talis, and some of the things we were told, and those things we can't say, so I'll not be saying it, but there's lots of things that Ukrainian soldiers show by their bravery and their courage with the right weaponry, what they can do. And so do we send another aid package which helps in the short term, but which does not end this aggression? Or do we step up and stand with the Ukrainians to push back against the actions of Putin and his regime and allow the country to rebuild? As a Christian, Mr. Chairman, I along with others in this House, probably regularly, indeed with myself certainly regularly, pray for the Ukrainians, and that God will deliver them. Because simply, Mr. Chairman, I believe that can happen, and that's the reason why we lift those prayers to the God that answers them. But also, I'm always minded in the Bible of the story of David and Goliath. And I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that Ukraine are very clearly the David, and Russia is very clearly the Goliath. And we know what happened in that battle. So we pray that that battle will be one that Ukraine will win and will be successful in. Mr. Chairman, it has long been my opinion that we should be doing more. It's not a criticism of anybody, Mr. Chairman. It's not that way. It's just to say, what more can we do? And I believe there's things we can do. That collectively we can encourage the Minister and our government and our Prime Minister to take the stand that the Ukrainians wishes to do. We should be doing more, I believe, and I will use my honourable friend's debate today to hammer home that point. If we have an international tribunal to report what we already know to be true, then it follows that we must do more than what we are doing. I'm minded, Mr. Chairman, as well of the genocide that the Russian soldiers have taken out against some of the Ukrainians, the murder of innocent people, the sexual abuse of many, many women and young girls. I find it very difficult, Mr. Chairman, to even imagine, indeed I don't want to imagine, some of the things that happened. But children as young as 8 and women as old as 80 by Russian monsters, because that's what they are. I want accountability, Mr. Chairman, and that's what my honourable friend wants, and I think that's what we all ask for in this House today, that we will have that accountability. And whoever those people are, wherever they think they're going to hide, there'll be no hiding place for them if we've anything to do with them. I also, as chair of the APPG for Freedom of Religious Belief, I make this plea as well. I've done it before. I've done it way back in the time of Crimea, because I knew it was happening then. But in Donbass, I'm a member of the Baptist Church, and it doesn't make me any smarter or any better than anybody else, but it gives me access to some of the information that flows back. In the Donbass region, there have been Baptist pastors who went missing. There's been churches destroyed. The catalogue of hate and human rights abuse, physical torture, murder by Russians against people who have a different religious viewpoint from the Orthodox Church, what we say. Not being critical of those of an Orthodox Church, I'm just making the point. The point is, no accountability. People have went missing, and we don't know where they are. I suspect they're no longer in this world, Mr. Chairman. But again, it does underline, I believe, that Russia has a lot to answer for. It follows, Mr. Chairman, that the international community must determine together that the days of sitting on the sidelines are done, and attempts to not anger Putin must end. Not anger Putin must end. Putin must understand that his attempted invasion of Ukraine has failed, and that he must withdraw his troops, and his people must look to rebuilding their own nation, which he has ravaged with this war. Not only do Ukrainians deserve peace, but the good people of Russia. The Honourable Lady said that in her intervention. Absolutely. Let's remember the good people of Russia also deserve it, and we must help them to achieve that as well. If there was a change of government in Russia, it undoubtedly would bring peace within the region and would let people have a life again. So I welcome this debate. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I welcome this debate. But more than this, I would welcome the determination by the UN, with every single ally determining that action is to be taken, and the message sent to China, to North Korea, and any other despot regime that the UN is not a talking shop, and that their guilt will make them accountable. So I support the people of Ukraine and Russia, and I support this motion for debate today in Westminster Hall. Let's call it what it is, Mr. Chairman, and get the work that needs to be done finished, and the quicker the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the gallant member for Honiton and Sidmouth for bringing forward this important debate. I was grateful for his cooperation in the last Parliament, not only on the issue of Ukraine, but also on the Balkans, which is an area of particular interest to us both. I'm very proud that over the last few years, the UK has consistently led international efforts to support Ukraine. The Conservative Party made sure that in government we were the party that stood behind Ukraine and were their first port of call. And we will continue with that same spirit in opposition to continue to be their safe harbour. Whether on pursuing justice through an international tribunal, seizing Russian state assets, supporting the ICC in its investigations, enforcing sanctions, or ensuring Ukraine had the weaponry it required to win, the UK must now continue to lead. I will start on a disappointing note, because I was heartbroken to hear President Zelensky say that Britain's leadership in Ukraine has slowed down. It is vital the new government demonstrates the same commitment. It must be resolute. It is quite extraordinary for another world leader to criticise the UK, to criticise any partner publicly. And his words were that the UK has demonstrated true leadership in arms, politics and support for the Ukrainian people, that this has saved thousands of lives, but now it has slowed down. The government will have our full support and those of everyone on the Conservative benches, and indeed the party of the Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth, if they step back up to the plate. We cannot have our greatest ally question our support in any way at this time. Conversely, whilst they will have our full support if they do that, we will provide full scrutiny should that support slip. And I welcome today the contribution by the Honourable Lady for Abington and Oxford West, who has made similarly the same points, and also the member for Strangford, who have both been consistent not only in their support for Ukraine, but also for human rights around the world. A special tribunal on Russia's crime of aggression would formalise Russian culpability for the invasion of Ukraine. It would prevent Putin from embedding his counterfactual narrative into history, which we should be in no doubt he is seeking to do. It would ensure that brave women and men and children from Ukraine, like Nika from my team who joins us in the audience today, does not suffer from Russia attempting to rewrite their history, to eradicate their truth. And it would give survivors their day in court, showing beyond doubt that the world cares and listens and that they will be heard. It would also demonstrate, as the Honourable Gentleman for Honiton said, that even members of the UN Security Council are not immune from international law. Now, the moral case for seeking justice for Russia's crime of aggression is indisputable, and the role of the government is to find the legal means to deliver it. None of us should pretend it is easy. It is not. And G7 countries have grappled together to find a way in which to deliver this. Now, the crime of aggression was adopted into international law by the UN General Assembly in 1971. And as the Honourable Jennifer Strangford set out, the definition agreed by the UN makes clear that there is a clear case for Russia to answer. Rather than repeating the list that he provided, I would just add a few others. The sponsorship of armed irregulars since 2014, the so-called little green men in Donbass, is an additional reason to bring this forward. But also there is a case against Belarus for allowing the use of its territory as a launchpad for the invasion. Now, why a special tribunal? As the Honourable Lady from Oxford West and Abington stated, neither Ukraine nor Russia are parties to the Rome Statute, meaning the ICC cannot prosecute Russia for their acts of aggression. Unlike in other areas, for example, Putin's abduction of Ukrainian children. Now, Ukraine is clear that the world must devise an alternative legal route for justice, as the initial crime leading to all subsequent atrocities, ensuring accountability for this is key. Likewise, we need to demonstrate a flexibility and determination to guarantee accountability for crimes both dissuades future breaches of international law and strengthens it in an increasingly dangerous world. Ukraine and the principle of justice demands a solution, and the government devoted a huge amount of time and energy to trying to deliver one. The UK is a part of the core group of 40 states working on a deliverable form of tribunal. We led on the G7 proposals for a hybrid tribunal which would solve some of the issues around immunity and legitimacy. And as the Honourable Gentleman said, there was the special conference in London on the topic of a special tribunal where I contributed to the communiqué that was published. Now, whilst the moral case for a special tribunal is clear and it has a firm basis in international law and in the UK, under the previous Conservative government, whilst we led efforts to find it, it was not straightforward, and we need to now hear how the government intends to carry on this important work. Ukraine has made clear that a special tribunal on its territory with elements of international involvement is not possible without changes to their constitution, and they cannot deliver that during a time of martial law. Likewise, the conventional route of establishing a special international tribunal through the UN Security Council is blocked due to Russia's veto. So finally, the tribunal must find a form that allows Russia's leadership to be tried in absentia, to the point around the conversation that took place in this debate about individual culpability, but we must make sure that diplomatic immunities are given in domestic courts must be dealt with. There have been suggestions of holding the tribunal in a third country, and the Dutch government has now stepped forward and reportedly expressed its willingness to host this special court. Given the Netherlands has a long history of hosting international human rights courts, this would seem an intelligent and practical option. However, it still requires an international mandate, and yes, Lord Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, supported the Council of Europe's work to establish a viable special tribunal in cooperation with Ukraine. And now today I would urge the UK to lobby for a vote at the UN General Assembly in September to establish a special tribunal in a third country in conjunction with the Netherlands. Holding Russia accountable for the crime of aggression is vitally important, but it requires imagination and drive in the face of deeply complex legal questions. As the war approaches its third year, the form of a viable tribunal would appear to be now taking shape. A special tribunal held in a third country, established by treaty between the Council of Europe and Ukraine, and supported by wider membership in the UN General Assembly, and that is the best route to justice. Our work in government got us to this point, and we sincerely hope the current government maintains the focus necessary to finish the job. So my questions, Mr. Chairman, are first for an update on any discussions held with my friend, the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Andriy Kostin. Has the Minister for Europe held discussions with his Ukrainian counterpart on establishing the tribunal? Does the government support now a special international tribunal held in a third country? Can they update on any progress made by the Council of Europe on agreeing that format? What conversations is the government having with non-European partners to secure their support for an international tribunal? And what form does the government see as best placed to solve the diplomatic immunity issues of Russia's leaders? Finally, can the Minister also confirm that strong representation, is made to Mongolia following their failure to arrest President Putin when he was on their soil this week? In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the crime of aggression is clearly defined in international law. It includes supporting irregular forces against a state, bombardment, invasion, occupation and annexation. It is the original sin from which all of Russia's other crimes have come and now must be tried. A special tribunal could determine formally that Russia committed an act of aggression against Ukraine, a peaceful neighbouring state. That would cement truth into history and block Putin's revisionist nonsense from taking root. Truth is fundamental to the future, and atrocity denial is a deliberate attack on victims and survivors, and Ukrainians know this more than most, having endured years of the Holodomor denial under the Soviet Union and continued lies by Russia. Putin understands the power of narrative and deliberately uses a walked past as a weapon to justify present wrongs, and the impetus, therefore, for a special tribunal on Russian aggression is clear, but yes, the legal route is complex. The work of the Conservatives and government with support across the House and in partnership with our allies has brought us close to a solution. Now we need to see this delivered for every Ukrainian who has suffered, for the victory of right over wrong, and to set a precedent to tear other oppressor states from their own acts of aggression. I thank the Honourable Member again for Honiton and Sidmouth for calling this important debate, and I genuinely wish the Minister every success in his efforts, because they are complex, they are thorny, but we finally have a way ahead, and there seems there is international consensus. Thank you, Chair.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you very much, Mr Effords, and it's a real pleasure to speak in this debate with you in the chair, and I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth for securing this important debate, and of course also for his great interest in this subject over a very long period of time, and of course in the APPG for Ukraine as well. The Minister for Europe, North America and UK Overseas Territories would have been delighted to take part in this debate, as indeed I'm sure the Honourable Member knows very well, and I know that they visited Ukraine together previously, but he is currently travelling elsewhere on ministerial duties. Therefore, I am here and very pleased to be responding on behalf of the government in this debate. And I want to start really by re-emphasising the comments from the Honourable Member for Strangford about the need for continued cross-party support in our support for Ukraine and our united determination to stand against Putin's aggression. Indeed, we've seen that determination and that commitment coming from the people of the UK in their hospitality, their support for Ukrainians who've come here. It's been incredibly important. And in response to the Right Honourable Lady, it's always a pleasure, of course, to serve opposite her. I want to make absolutely clear from the beginning of this discussion that the new UK government's support for Ukraine could not be clearer. She is, I know, aware that the Prime Minister himself was clear that there would be that commitment of military support from the new UK government of £3 billion a year until 2030 to 31, or for as long as is necessary. That's an unprecedented commitment. Of course, the Prime Minister himself, the Foreign Secretary, the Defence Secretary, all spoke with their opposite numbers in Ukraine within the first hours of the new government coming into post, and we have prioritised this both within NATO and, of course, in the European political community as well. It really is important that we continue to see that united support, that we do not see this issue being politicised. I think that would be a terrible shame. That is not something that would support Ukraine in its hour of need. Yes, of course.
I think the ladies recognise, however, that President Zelensky cannot be accused of politicising the situation. And if the Conservative Party was still in power and the lady had heard President Zelensky say that, I would have heard it every single day and every single moment. We have been courteous in raising it. It is right to raise it. We cannot accept, and I'm very relieved to hear her assurances today, but we can never again hear President Zelensky, more than 6 weeks into a Labour government, say that he is deeply concerned. And so I'm relieved and grateful for her reassurances today, and I hope we can move forward in exactly that spirit of seeing the support that Ukraine deserves.
Well, I believe that support and that united approach is incredibly important for reasons that I'll come back to in a moment in terms of the needs that Ukraine itself has, of course, for a united, continued front for the UK to, above all, be playing a role, not just directly in that provision of military support, but, of course, with other nations as well, and indeed ensuring accountability, the subject for this debate. I was talking particularly about party political approaches to this. Of course, the current government avoided that in opposition. I think it will be very important if we can continue that. I know the lady herself would want to make sure that that continued to be the case, and I'm grateful for her comments in that regard just now. And I think it's particularly important also, of course, in that context, as was mentioned earlier, where we do see an increased prevalence of conflict globally. Sadly, I'm well aware of that as the Minister for Development, that we continue to have that unified voice when it comes to the UK's position. Chair, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine is clearly a violation of the UN Charter. It strikes at the very heart of the rules on which our security and prosperity depend. And the atrocities in Ukraine are some of the worst we've seen in Europe since World War II. Over 6 million Ukrainians have been forced to flee the country. Over 3 million have been internally displaced. And the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights reports that over 11,000 civilians have been killed and at least 23,600 have been injured. And the recent attacks, of course, that we saw disturbingly on the 26th and 27th of August represent continued evidence that Russia is targeting civilian energy infrastructure intentionally without any regard for the safety and livelihood of millions of Ukrainians. These attacks threaten civil access to power, heating and water supply and risk further humanitarian crisis this winter. And my constituency neighbour, the Honourable Member for Oxford West and Abingdon, spoke eloquently on this subject in her contribution. We also, of course, heard from the member who's no longer in his place about concerning evidence about even developments today concerning additional instances of Putin's aggression on the people of Ukraine. Of course, overall, Ukraine's Office of the Prosecutor General has recorded more than 135,000 incidents of alleged war crimes, including murder, rape and the deportation of children. They do indeed appall us all. And the Russian missile that hit a children's hospital in July is yet further evidence of Putin's callous disregard for human life. And of course, yesterday in the House, we discussed, and a number of members here were present in that debate, the fact that, of course, we've also seen attacks recently that have impacted on, for example, children in a playground in Kharkiv and a children's rehabilitation centre and orphanage as well. So we really do need to see accountability. Ukraine obviously wants accountability itself, both for these hideous atrocities and for the illegal, unprovoked invasion from which the war crimes stem. And I did appreciate that clarification, of course, at the very beginning from the member for Honiton and Sidmouth in that regard. There's, of course, the initial illegal, unprovoked invasion and then also what has followed from it. He was right to separate the two. The UK is committed to ensuring that Russia is held to account for its actions. And the UK's leading efforts to refer the situation in Ukraine to the International Criminal Court and, of course, to ensure that it is then taking action as an independent court. And I can inform members that that referral has now secured the support of 42 other countries. So that's the biggest state referral in the history of the ICC. This has enabled the ICC prosecutor to proceed straight to investigation without the need for judicial approval. And having led this group referral, the UK is committed to making sure that the ICC has what it needs to continue this work. Obviously, there has been a financial contribution, including under the previous government. We're grateful for that, £2.3 million in additional contributions to the court since the start of the war. That funding has increased the ICC's capacity to collect evidence and provide enhanced psychosocial support for witnesses and survivors of the atrocities committed by Russia. And in response to the comments on this subject from the Honourable Member for Oxford West and Abingdon, I want to be clear that the ICC is an independent judicial institution. It is for the ICC prosecutor, obviously, to determine the nature and focus of the court's investigations, but these are now well underway and they are making progress. So in 2023, the ICC issued arrest warrants, of course, for President Putin and his Children's Rights Commissioner, Maria Belova-Lvova, for the unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children. So when it comes to that issue around indictment, around the provision of warrants, I do want to underline the existence of that warrant for Putin from the ICC. On the subject of Putin's visit to Mongolia that was mentioned by the opposition Minister, we have indeed raised our concerns, of course, with the Mongolian authorities about their decision to host President Putin in these circumstances, and we're absolutely clear that we respect the independence and the role of the International Criminal Court. We've made that very clear. Following those initial warrants, we've also seen, of course, in March of this year, arrest warrants issued for top Russian commanders Sergei Kobylash and Viktor Sokolov for directing missile attacks at civilian objects, including Ukrainian electricity infrastructure. And in June, arrest warrants were issued for the former Russian Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu and the Chief of the General Staff for the Russian Armed Forces, Valery Gerasimov. And while the list of ICC subjects is growing, it will be in the courts of Ukraine, not The Hague, that the majority of cases, of course, are going to be heard. In May 2022, again under the previous government, we're grateful for this action. The UK established the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, or ACA, within the European Union and US to provide advice and support to the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine to enhance capacity to investigate and prosecute war crimes through their domestic system. UK funding for this work overall has come to £6.2 million, and overall UK experts have provided advice on over 100 atrocity crimes cases at central and regional levels, and that work very much continues. UK support for Ukraine's investigations has been further boosted also by the deployment of our former International Criminal Court judge, Sir Howard Morrison, KC. Of course, people in this chamber will be well aware of his eminence as an independent advisor to Ukraine's Prosecutor General. And obviously, in response to the comments on this subject from the opposition bench, that support is continuing. He's overseen the delivery of war crimes training to 294 Ukrainian judges, 86 prosecutors and 19 investigators. Now, we do support Ukraine's calls for accountability for the crime of aggression, as well as the decision to invade Ukraine illegally and without provocation, from which so many further crimes have followed. As we made clear in our manifesto, the new government will support work towards establishing a special tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Those responsible for the hideous atrocities we've seen in Ukraine must be held to account for their actions. Now, agreement on the details of the tribunal will matter if it's to be legally sound and to attract the broad international support that will be crucial to its legitimacy and ultimately impact. If we want this to work, and we do, then we need to get it right. So we continue to play an active role in the core group established and led by Ukraine to explore options for achieving criminal accountability, including through a special tribunal. Now, as some members in this room will know, it brings together many experts. Very happy to. Yeah.
I'm very grateful for the Minister to give way. And just on this point about how we think through the special tribunal and the difficulties in establishing it that have been well covered in this debate, I wanted to refer to the 40 of the greatest legal minds that come together to consider this issue, including Professor Kanda, who's a member of the UN International Law Commission, a group convened by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and to ask the Minister if she would consider maybe meeting with this group to help think through some of the complicated issues that are part of resolving something we all want to see, which is accountability to Putin and others for their crimes.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making that incredibly important point, and we're already seeing, of course, UK legal expertise directly involved in this process through that contribution to the group, but I'm sure that Minister Doughty in particular would be keen to have that interaction with those preeminent lawyers and really to understand more about what we can do in this area, because clearly the need is urgent, but we are also, as I said, resolutely focused on that issue, on ensuring that any tribunal would have the broad international support that it needs to ensure legitimacy. Of course, as well as doing what we can as the UK, kind of bilaterally, as it were, we're also making sure we're working with international partners on this, as he would expect and as other members in this chamber would expect. And that process will need to address all of the critical issues, and just specifically on the issue raised by the honourable member who raised this debate of the head of state immunity. Immunity is indeed one of those critical issues. It's one of those issues that we, together with partners from over 40 states and institutions, are discussing in that core group that was established by Ukraine. We appreciate the necessity of holding all of those responsible for this war of aggression to account. Now, the UK is also a founding member of the International Register of Damage. That's alongside, again, 40 other states. This allows individuals to file claims for loss, injury and damage that have been caused by Russia's illegal invasion. And it's an important first step as well, as part of, in that case, an international compensation mechanism, but overall in achieving the accountability that is needed here. Because Russia must be held responsible for its illegal war in Ukraine, and that of course includes its obligations under international law to pay for the damage that it has caused. And together with our G7 partners, we've agreed to make available approximately $50 billion to Ukraine by the end of the year by advancing the extraordinary profits generated by immobilised Russian sovereign assets in the European Union. And on the subject of sanctions that was mentioned by a member who's no longer in his place, a critically important subject, we're absolutely determined as a new government to ensure that sanctions are not circumvented, that we have a robust regime, and I'm sure honourable members in this chamber will be pleased to know that the UK, very soon after the election, through the European political community, managed to ensure there was a call to action against Russia's shadow fleet, which of course has been significant, unfortunately, when it's come to the avoidance of sanctions, so taking resolute action in that area. On the subject of human rights that was mentioned absolutely rightly by the honourable member for Strangford, who I thank for his very kind remarks, he is right to detail the dreadful situation we see in Russia, and of course my constituency neighbour as well, for Oxford West and Abingdon, also mentioned this. Putin's Kremlin has spent 2 decades in a situation where it has seen a significant deterioration of human rights. That has, of course, intensified over the last 2 years, and we stand with those who have been impacted by this. We, of course, have been particularly concerned about those detained on political grounds, the very brave individuals who have stood for human rights and human dignity, and we continue to raise cases, particularly those of British nationals, of course, and we saw some developments in that area, but we still see dreadful persecution of those who've raised human rights issues. Chair, I want to start to round off my remarks, if I may, by thanking all members for their interventions. They've been incredibly powerful and important. I want to reiterate that this government is determined to hold Russia to account for its illegal and barbaric actions in Ukraine. With Ukraine and our other partners, we share the goal of securing accountability for the crimes that have been committed, and we're supporting Ukraine to investigate and prosecute those responsible for atrocities, as well as the investigation by the ICC. We'll continue to engage in international fora, including the core group, looking at the special tribunal proposals, working on these actively. And tomorrow the Lord Chancellor will be in Vilnius to attend the Conference of the Ministers of Justice of the Council of Europe, where we look forward to engaging with our partners on achieving justice for Ukraine. And the Honourable member opposite rightly referred to the significance of action within the Council of Europe in this regard. So we are seeking to make progress there, including, as I said, this week. Together, we will make sure that allegations of international crimes are investigated robustly and independently, and we will continue to stand by the brave people of Ukraine for as long as it takes, as they defend not only their freedom, but our shared security and prosperity as well. Thank you.
Richard Ford to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Efford, and I'm grateful to all honourable members who participated in today's debate. Firstly, the honourable member for Strangford took us back to first principles when he talked about freedom, liberty and democracy, and it does remind us that when we're talking about arcane legal matters, actually this is also a matter of the self-determination of the Ukrainian people and their ability to choose their own future. And the honourable member for Strangford also gave us a very visual image with David and Goliath, and it is partly through this proposed special tribunal that it is suggested the international community could try to tip the scales in favour of David. In his intervention, the honourable member for East Londonderry, who's not in his place anymore, talked about loopholes in sanctions, and he's right to do so. I was informed earlier this week that there are still oil services companies that are still actively doing business with Russian energy companies. SLB being one, has UK offices at Birmingham Gate, and essentially, though inadvertently, it is contributing funds to Moscow's war machine. The honourable member for Oxford West and Abingdon and spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats reminded us of the important work of the core group of more than 40 states established in 2023. And it is encouraging that the UK is part of this group, but we could really be an even more eminent voice in the UK in that core group were the government to choose to go that route. In addition, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson talked about how we see the spectre of a second Trump presidency. And we know that Donald Trump regards himself as a deal maker. He thinks of himself as somebody who is able to broker a deal and get a compromise. And when we're dealing with some absolutes like international justice and the crime of aggression, I'm suggesting there just isn't room for this sort of grubby compromise when on the line there are the deaths of those 11,000 civilians that we heard about this afternoon. In her contribution, the honourable member for Rutland and Melton talked about the rewriting of history by Putin, and this is definitely something that we need to be very wary of. He tends to engage in this historical revisionism. Even before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he was engaged in this in relation to Ukraine. Even in relation to Poland in December 2019, he talked about how somehow Poland was responsible for the attack by Nazi Germany because Poland had laid itself open to attack from Hitler's military machine. We need to make sure that the record of history is written correctly in relation to Russia and Putin. The Honourable Member for Rutland and Melton talked also about the business of support by the UK for Ukraine. I think we should be very wary of getting into party political turf on this one. I see that there is nobody in place today from the Reform Party, but as far as I'm concerned, I think they are the only political party in this Parliament that don't buy into the consensus on UK support for Ukraine. And long may it continue that we have some very solid support between political parties. We saw this in the last Parliament, where Grant Shapps, as Defence Secretary, announced an uplift from £2.5 to £3 billion in military aid for Ukraine. That was welcomed automatically, and we shouldn't be seeking to score political points on this. And finally, I'm grateful to the Minister for her comments. And on the point that I led on in relation to personal immunities, I will continue to press the government on that, and I'll be talking to the Honourable Member for Cardiff South and Penarth, who I know is very interested in this matter too. Thank you.
So just for future reference, and summing up is meant to be brief, so I was generous there because we have plenty of time left. The question is that the House has considered the potential merits of an international special tribunal on crimes of aggression in Ukraine. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 4 p.m. So suspended till 4:30?
You can give her 20 seconds. Do you want to...
Good,
Is she there? Is she outside? You can give them like 10 seconds, but...
If she's here, I'll do it. But